2 rangers went into that forest tracking a grizzly. On day 2, the tracks stopped, and something else's prints replaced them. 18 inches long, walking on 2 feet. What they filmed next? 3 research teams still haven't been able to identify. And the grizzly? It didn't run. It disappeared. I'm going to show you that footage. But first you need to understand why an entire Alaskan town vanished overnight. Because what drove those people out of their homes matches what those rangers found. Track for track. I want to be upfront with you before we go a single second further. I am not a believer. I'm a skeptic by habit, by preference, and honestly by personality. I like things I can verify. I like explanations that fit frameworks I can test. I have no interest in telling you something is real when I can't back it up with documented evidence, filed reports, and sources I can actually name. So when I tell you I've spent several months going deep on this cross-referencing historical records, indigenous oral histories, government incident reports, and independent researcher analysis from 3 separate institutions, I need you to understand something. I came into this looking for the rational explanation. On some of it, I found one. On a disturbing amount of it, I didn't. What we're covering today connects 3 separate threads across 3 different locations and 2 centuries of documented accounts. A ghost town in Alaska abandoned 4 times under circumstances that still don't have a clean official explanation. A remote forest in North Carolina where I've personally had experiences I cannot account for. And ranger footage from the Pacific Northwest that, as of right now, remains officially and formally unidentified. These aren't campfire stories. There is a pattern here. And by the time we get to that footage, you're going to see exactly what I mean. Let's start in 17729. On the southern coast of Alaska, between dense forest and freezing bay water, sits a place called Portlock. If you try to visit it today, you'll find abandoned buildings being slowly consumed by wilderness, rusted equipment, empty streets, the kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace, it feels like something holding its breath. Portlock is a ghost town. But here's what separates it from every other ghost town in America. It was abandoned, not once, not twice, but 4 separate times. 4 different groups of people, across 2 centuries, all tried to build a life there. All of them left. And the reason each of them left matches the behavioral profile of exactly what those rangers captured on camera. Stay with me. The earliest documented European to set foot there was a British naval captain named Nathaniel Portlock, 1785, experienced crew, men who had survived brutal ocean crossings, violent storms, hostile coastlines across multiple continents. When they landed on that Alaskan shore, the first thing they noticed stopped all of them. The land was already abandoned, but it wasn't empty. There were remnants of a native village, structural remains, tools, signs of a community that had existed here and simply ceased to. And yet the land itself was extraordinary. Rich fishing waters, forest thick with game, a natural harbor. By every practical measure, this was one of the most ideal settlement locations on the entire Alaskan coast. So why had whoever lived here left everything behind? Portlock's crew didn't have an answer. They decided to stay anyway. Within weeks, it started. Members of the crew began breaking down, and I want to be specific here because this is important later. It wasn't a fever spreading person to person, no identifiable contagion. What these men described was something more psychological than physical. A creeping dread with no visible source, a sense of being watched that intensified with each passing day, an irrational but completely overwhelming need to leave. Even the most mentally hardened men in the crew eventually couldn't hold it together. They begged Portlock to abandon the settlement. He agreed. They left. What Portlock didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that 6 years earlier, in 1779, a group of Spanish explorers had attempted the exact same thing on the exact same land. Same discovery of an abandoned native settlement, same decision to stay, then same result, almost identical in sequence. The Spanish crew began hearing sounds from the forest at night, not animal sounds they recognized. Sounds that seemed to get closer with each passing night, as if whatever was making them was testing responses, moving incrementally inward, measuring the reaction. One by one, the men collapsed under the same combination of physical illness and mounting psychological terror. Eventually, the entire crew fled, and they never returned. Now here's where the skeptical framework actually offers something useful. Researchers who study large predator behavior have documented a phenomenon called infrasound, extremely low-frequency sound waves, below the range of human hearing. Certain large mammals produce it. Tigers use infrasound to create a paralysis effect in prey before striking. Sperm whales use similar acoustic pressure to disorient targets. And the documented effect of infrasound on humans includes nausea, dizziness, visual disturbances, and most significantly, a profound, sourceless sense of dread. You feel terrified. Your rational brain identifies no threat. Your body is already in full panic response. Both Spanish and British crews, separated by 6 years, would have experienced exactly what they reported if a large predator was deploying infrasound in those forests. Sickness they couldn't explain. Fear with no visible cause. An urge to flee that overrode decades of training. That's not a supernatural explanation, that's biology. But it raises one enormous question: what predator? The Rangers found that answer, and it weighs approximately 8 feet tall. For over 80 years after Portlock's departure, Portlock remained completely untouched. Then, in 1867, a nomadic group known as the Sukpiak arrived. These were experienced wilderness people, tough, adaptable, deeply knowledgeable about Alaskan terrain in ways that most people alive today genuinely cannot comprehend. When they found Portlock, again empty, again rich with resources, they celebrated. They believed they had been led somewhere blessed. 1 month after their arrival, the attacks began. And here's what matters. The Sukpiak were explicit and consistent in what they described. These were not raids from rival tribes. What came out of the forest at night was something they had no existing category for. Their oral accounts preserved across generations and later documented by researchers described them as cannibal giants. Massive, upright creatures with a specific and terrifying behavioral logic. When game was plentiful in the surrounding forest, when the wild food supply was healthy, the giants disappeared entirely. The village had peace, but the moment the animal populations thinned and the forest couldn't sustain what was living in it, the attacks returned. Harder each time, more aggressive, more targeted. Think about what that behavioral pattern indicates. That is not random predation. That is a creature maintaining a food hierarchy. Preferred prey first. When that depletes, move to the next available food source. That is planning. That is the kind of adaptive intelligence that separates apex predators from opportunistic scavengers. And here's why this matters for the footage. Because the Rangers found evidence of exactly this kind of displacement behavior. Something moved into the Grizzly's territory, and the Grizzly yielded. The Sukpiak attempted to defend themselves for nearly 4 decades. They were not people who frightened easily, but the relentless nature of the attacks, combined with the sheer physical power being described across every account, wore them down. By 1905, they were gone. They left Portlock, and the stories they carried out with them would shape the fate of every community that dared to follow. A new group arrived, the Russian Unsolved, modern, organized, bringing 20th century infrastructure with them. They built a cannery to process the abundant salmon runs, a post office, a school, residential facilities. At its peak, Portlock was a genuine functioning town with real community life. But the Unsolved were not naive about where they were building. They knew the stories. They knew the name the elders used, Nantiinaq, translated differently depending on the source. Some say it means half man, half beast. Others translate it simply as the giant hairy thing. What every translation agrees on is the category. It was not a bear. It was not a wolf. It was something that had never been cleanly placed in any animal taxonomy they possessed. So the Unsolved did something remarkable. They didn't dismiss the legend. They legislated around it. Nightly curfew enforced without exception. Armed guards stationed at the cannery, the school, and along the main streets after dark. But the most specific rule, the one that tells you the most about what kind of predator they believed they were facing, was this. Nobody went outside on foggy days. Not stay armed. Not travel in groups. Not avoid deep forest, specifically the fog. Sit with that rule for a moment. This is a community of tough, experienced Alaskan settlers. People who had survived conditions that would break most of us in days. And their primary defensive protocol was a rule about visibility conditions. That tells you exactly what kind of predator this is. It's patient. It's strategic. It uses concealment deliberately. It waits for conditions where it cannot be clearly seen or tracked before it moves. That is not bear behavior. That is not wolf behavior. That is the behavioral signature of something with tactical intelligence, the same signature, by the way, present in every second of that ranger footage. When I tell you what the rangers documented about how that creature positioned itself before it stood up, you're going to remember this rule immediately. For nearly a decade, the Alutiiq's strict protocols held. Portlock thrived. Then in 1931, the rules started to slip. Communities get comfortable. It is human nature. When the threat hasn't materialized in years, urgency fades. Someone bends a rule, nothing happens, and that becomes the new normal. In 1931, a logger named Marcus Holt went into the forest alone. He wasn't going deep, just routine timber work near the edge. He'd done similar trips before without incident. He didn't come back. The search party that found him the next morning came back from that clearing different people than when they left, because what they found didn't fit any framework they had for understanding what had happened. Holt's skull had been crushed, caved in by his own logging sled. Industrial equipment, heavy, reinforced, built for brutal conditions. You cannot swing one with your hands. You cannot generate the leverage to use one as a weapon through any human means. Even multiple men working together would struggle to move it the way the evidence indicated. His dogs, large, strong working animals that had been with him, were scattered around the clearing, torn, not mauled in the pattern the region's experienced hunters knew from bear attacks. Torn, with a force that left the search party unable to speak, and the sled itself thrown, a significant distance from the body, as if discarded. No human tracks other than Holt's, no bear prints. One set of massive impressions in the soft ground near the tree line. The search party measured them. They didn't know what to write in their official report. Portlock never fully recovered from that morning. Fear does something specific to communities. It either pulls people into unified vigilance or fractures them into denial. Portlock fractured. Some residents needed it to be a bear. An unusually aggressive bear, terrible, but something that existed within the world they understood. Something that could be hunted. That explanation was more psychologically survivable than the alternative. Others said nothing in public, but they reinforced their doors and made sure their children were inside before dark every single evening without fail. Then, Derek Weston had his encounter. Weston was working down by the shoreline one afternoon routine task, cutting wood for fish traps. He looked up because something had changed at the edge of his peripheral vision. Standing on the beach, perhaps 40 yards away, was something he had never encountered in his life. Upright, by his estimate against the tree line behind it, approximately 8 feet tall, proportioned across the shoulders and chest in ways that no human frame achieves. Dark, coarse hair across the entire visible body. But the detail that Weston returned to every time he told this story for the rest of his life was the eyes. It was not looking in his direction by accident. It was watching him, with the kind of focused, evaluating attention you associate with intelligence rather than instinct. He described it as looking at something that was fully aware of exactly what it was doing and fully aware of exactly what he was doing. That description, that specific quality of intelligence, is word for word what the lead ranger wrote in his official report after reviewing the helmet cam footage. I'm going to read you that exact line when we get there. Weston ran home, grabbed his rifle, came back to the beach. The creature was still there. He raised the rifle, found it through the sights, finger on the trigger. He could not fire. He described it later as not exactly fear, though fear was present, more like a sudden, physical certainty that pulling the trigger would be the wrong decision, not morally, strategically. Like something in the oldest part of his brain understood that he was looking at something that would respond to an attack in ways he was not equipped to survive. The creature held his gaze unhurried, completely still, then turned and walked back into the tree line, not fleeing, choosing to leave. Weston never went to that beach alone again. After Marcus Holt, after Derek Weston's encounter, the disappearances began accelerating. The town found ways to explain them individually at first. Gold prospectors go on long trips, hunters push deep and lose track of time. Dangerous professions in brutal terrain people don't always come home. These were real, rational explanations for individual cases. But the bodies started turning up, and individual explanations stopped holding weight. They washed up in the bay. They appeared on forest trails, and the consistent, specific manner of damage across all of them, examined by experienced Alaskan hunters who had spent their entire lives around real predator attacks, produced one unanimous conclusion. This was not a bear. Official records documented approximately 15 missing persons. The Alutiiq community consistently maintained the real number was closer to 30. The gap between those two figures tells its own story about what was being officially recorded versus what was actually happening. Throughout the forest during this period, the Alutiiq also documented something physical that has no clean, rational explanation. Trees grown, rooted, mature trees that had been pulled from the ground and reinserted upside down. Root system above the soil line. Trunk driven into the earth. Not snapped by storm, not knocked by other falling trees, extracted and repositioned. The strength required to do that to a mature tree exceeds anything currently in North American wildlife taxonomy. In 1950, the Alutiiq community left Portlock, not gradually, overnight, essentially without announcement, as though they believed that whatever was hunting them was intelligent enough to anticipate a planned departure and respond to it. They left a single post office worker behind to close out the town's remaining service obligations. During his final nights alone in the empty settlement, he reported hearing heavy, bipedal footsteps moving deliberately through the abandoned streets. He locked the post office, and he left. Portlock has been empty ever since. But the creature didn't stop. This is the part of the Portlock story that rarely gets covered fully. A hunter working the forest near the abandoned settlement, tracking wild goats, became aware, gradually, that something was following him. Initial signs were subtle sounds in the underbrush, movement at the edge of visibility, a quality of silence he couldn't account for. Then the following sounds changed register. Footsteps that had been slow and measured became fast. He wasn't being tracked anymore. He was being chased. He ran. He did not look back. A sound came from behind him that he later described as something between a scream and a roar, landing in a frequency range he had never heard from any animal, and it pursued him all the way to the forest edge before stopping. 3 hunters caught by a storm took shelter in Portlock's abandoned buildings. Through the night, something circled their position, growling, making sounds they described as almost structured patterns, suggesting communication without quite achieving it. All 3 men, independently, described the footsteps as bipedal, heavy, measured, deliberate. Not long after, a separate hunting party tracking moose in the same region found something that stopped all of them where they stood. Footprints in soft ground, 18 inches from heel to toe, pressed deep into earth that would have barely registered a large man's weight. They followed the prints to a clearing. The grass had been violently flattened, evidence of a struggle. The moose tracks ended there. A healthy, fully grown adult moose gone. The bipedal prints continued up the mountainside. Nothing in documented North American wildlife takes a healthy adult moose in a straight fight and then walks away on 2 feet. An Anchorage paramedic was responding to a cardiac call at a county jail, a 70-year-old Alutiiq man who had suffered a heart attack. Making small talk during treatment, the paramedic casually mentioned he'd once hunted near Portlock. The old man, medically compromised, barely conscious moments before, sat straight up, grabbed the paramedic by the shirt, eyes wide. "Did you see it? Did it bother you?" Over and over, even as guards tried to restrain him. As they pulled him away down the hall, his voice kept coming back. "Did you see it? Did it bother you?" That is not the reaction of someone telling a legend. I want to step away from Portlock for a moment and tell you what happened to me, because the context matters for everything that comes next. A few months ago, I hiked alone into a remote section of wilderness in North Carolina. Thousands of acres, no marked trails, no cell service. The kind of place where the canopy cuts the light to near darkness at midday and visibility through the undergrowth is sometimes under 20 feet. I arrived as a storm was ending, set up camp in a small clearing. That evening, footsteps started in the surrounding forest. Not deer, not bear. I know what bear movement through dense brush sounds like. These footsteps were deliberate, spaced the way a walking biped spaces its steps. They circled my camp at varying distances for most of the night. I looked every time. I saw nothing. Middle of the night, a loud crash nearby. Something large impacting the ground or a tree. I marked the direction and waited for dawn. Hiking out the next morning on the same game trail I'd used coming in there was a tree across my path that had not been there the day before, 20 feet long. I examined the scene for a long time. No drag marks in the ground, no disturbed soil, no fresh hole where roots had been pulled. The roots themselves were clean, no fresh dirt, meaning this tree had been uprooted a significant time before. Something had moved a 20-foot uprooted tree to a specific location on a specific trail between my arrival the previous day and my departure that morning. The root end alone, I could barely lift it off the ground with both hands. Moving the entire tree would have required equipment I didn't have and couldn't have brought in on a 2-hour hike through unmapped terrain. I went back recently to recon that area. The forest was silent in a way that healthy forests are not silent. Arriving bird calls, insects, whined through the canopy, the constant background of a living ecosystem. Then, over roughly 20 minutes, nothing. Complete absence of sound. Every experienced wilderness person watching this knows exactly what that silence means. Something displaced the natural soundscape. Something that doesn't belong to that ecosystem moved into it, and every creature in the forest registered it before I did. Later in the day, during a storm break movement in the tree line, large, visible for approximately 2 seconds. What registered in those 2 seconds was height. Whatever moved through those trees was taller than the surrounding brush in proportions that ruled out most things I know of. I have no clean explanation. I'm not offering one. What I will say is that the behavioral profile, the deliberate movement, the use of concealment, the patience, the apparent awareness of my specific route matches the Portlock accounts in ways I find difficult to dismiss as coincidence. And it matches the ranger footage in ways that made the hair on my arms stand up the first time I watched it. Now we get to why we're here. 2 wildlife rangers in the Pacific Northwest were assigned to track an unusually large grizzly. Multiple livestock incidents near a remote ridge over several weeks, the size and manner of the kills had flagged this bear as operating well outside typical behavioral parameters. The rangers were experienced. This was serious, documented fieldwork. Day 1, clear grizzly prints, consistent trail moving northeast along the ridge, exactly expected. Day 2, the prints stopped. Not at a stream crossing, not on rocky terrain, on a section of soft, undisturbed forest floor. The grizzly's prints simply ceased mid-stride. The impression of the final print was complete. The ground ahead of it was undisturbed. Approximately 8 feet forward from that last grizzly print bipedal impressions, human in outline, 18 inches from heel to toe, pressed 4 to 5 inches deep into packed earth. The rangers calculated the body weight required to achieve that impression depth. The number they arrived at exceeded any recorded human or known primate by a significant margin. The prints moved northeast. In the same direction the grizzly had been traveling. The rangers followed, maintaining distance, helmet cameras rolling. At approximately 80 yards, through a gap in the tree cover, something stood up. The figure rose from a partially concealed position in a way that the lead ranger later described in his official report as controlled and deliberate. Not startled, not reacting. It had been there. It had known they were approaching. And at the moment of its choosing, it stood. Cross-referencing the figure's height against the known species of surrounding trees at that specific location, independent analysts calculated a standing height of approximately 8 feet. The proportions, specifically the shoulder-to-hip ratio and the limb length relative to torso, do not correspond to any known primate anatomy. The figure stood, turned, located the camera. For 11 seconds, it didn't move. The lead ranger, in his official report, wrote this: "During those 11 seconds, neither myself nor my partner spoke or moved. What I observed in the subject's attention was not the reactive awareness of a startled animal. It was evaluative. It was assessing us." That is word for word what Derek Weston said standing on a beach in Port Locke in 1931. Evaluative. Assessing. After 11 seconds, the figure turned away from the camera and walked into the forest. Not running, not crashing through brush the way any startled animal moves. Walking with the same deliberate, unhurried pace that communicates, more clearly than anything else could, that whatever this was leaving was its choice. The The footage was submitted to 3 independent research teams for biomechanical analysis. The gait analysis alone, the specific mechanics of weight transfer, stride length, and arm movement ruled out a human in any kind of suit, ruled out any known bear behavior. The third team's report included a line that the lead researcher told me he rewrote 4 times before submitting because he couldn't find a more accurate way to say it. We cannot attribute this footage to any known North American species. Probably not a bear. Not likely human. Cannot attribute. I told you at the beginning, I'm a skeptic. Let me honor that. Portlock's history has rational explanations available for individual elements. The mutilated bodies, aggressive bear, brutal terrain, dangerous professions, Marcus Holt's death, a possible seizure, a tragic fall, the dog's a separate bear incident. The missing hunters and prospectors frontier Alaska kills people through entirely mundane means with grim regularity. Rebecca Stone, a community leader from Portlock, one of the most prominent voices on the town's documented history, has made exactly this case. In her account, the abandonment was economic migration. Better schools, better infrastructure, better opportunities in developing towns nearby. That pattern was real across mid-century Alaskan communities, and it's a legitimate historical factor. I take her account seriously. I believe she believes it. But Rebecca Stone is also the person who translated the 2009 interview that her cousin, Carol Winters, gave to the Homer Tribune. And Carol Winters, looking directly at the interviewer, said, translated by Rebecca herself, that her people left Portlock because the Nantiinaq was killing them. In a later interview, when a follow-up journalist asked Rebecca directly if the Nantiinaq posed no real danger, why does she still advise anyone passing through that region to stay quiet and avoid drawing attention to themselves? She changed the subject. Some silences carry more information than answers do. Portlock, Alaska, a remote forest in North Carolina, a Pacific Northwest ridge where a grizzly's tracks simply stop and something else begins. 3 locations, 2 centuries of documented accounts, entirely separate cultures and communities with no connection to each other, and the same behavioral profile, described in consistent detail across all of them. Something large, bipedal, patient, strategic. Something that uses concealment as a primary tool, that understands reduced visibility as an advantage, that positions itself before revealing itself, that chooses when to be seen and when to withdraw. Something with enough physical capability to displace a mature grizzly bear from its own territory without a documented confrontation. Something that, when it decides it has been observed long enough, walks away. Not flees, walks. The Unsolved community of Portlock developed their survival protocols through 30 years of direct experience with this thing. And their most specific rule, the one they enforced above all others, was not about weapons or group movement or staying near the settlement. It was about visibility. Don't go into the fog. That rule is not designed around a bear. That rule is designed around a predator that actively selects conditions where it cannot be clearly seen or tracked before it moves. A predator that plans its approach around human limitations. A predator with enough self-awareness to understand the relationship between concealment and tactical advantage. That is what drove 4 separate communities out of Portlock over 2 centuries. And that is what 2 rangers filmed for 11 seconds on a Pacific Northwest ridge before it turned around and walked back into the trees. 3 teams looked at that footage, reviewed the gait analysis, the height calculation, the biomechanical breakdown, all of it. 3 separate methodologies, 3 separate institutions, arriving at their conclusions independently. And all 3 of them said the same thing. They don't know what it is. And the people who lived closest to it, who spent 30 years developing specific behavioral protocols around its specific patterns, didn't stay long enough to find out. Portlock has been empty since 1951. I'm going back into that North Carolina forest. Trail cameras, this time positioned at the game trail where the tree appeared, and at 3 additional locations I mapped on my last visit. Whatever is operating in that forest has given me enough reason to look harder. That video goes up the moment I have something worth showing you. I'm N.O.T. going to tell you what to believe. That is genuinely not my job here. My job is to show you the documented evidence, all of it, including the parts that don't fit neatly into either direction, and let you sit with it honestly. What I will leave you with is this. The Unsolved people survived in one of the most brutal environments on Earth. They were not superstitious. They were not easily frightened, and they ran from Portlock in the middle of the night so fast, so quietly, that they left almost everything they owned behind because they believed that giving advance notice to what was hunting them would give it time to respond. Think about what kind of predator requires that level of strategic departure. Think about what kind of intelligence makes an overnight evacuation the safer option. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. I want one specific thing from you. What do you think is happening in those 11 seconds? Because I've watched that footage more times than I can count, and I still can't settle on a clean answer. Subscribe and turn the bell on. Part 2. Trail cameras in the Green Forest goes up the moment I have something worth showing you. You don't want to miss that one. And if Portlock's history hit you as hard as it hit me, the full deep dive is queued up right after this. Watch it next. The history goes even deeper than what we covered today. Stay curious. Stay honest about what you don't know. And whatever you do, don't go into the fog.